Hi, everyone. I want to tell you all about another podcast I think you'll enjoy. College Matters from the Chronicle. College Matters is a weekly show from the Chronicle of Higher Education, and it's a great resource for news and analysis about colleges and universities. You'll hear sharp discussions with Chronicle journalists, offering fresh perspectives on the latest salvos from the Trump administration, and keen insights about how faculty and students are adapting to technological changes. College Matters also features incisive interviews with newsmakers, including recent conversations with Chris Eisgruber, Princeton University's president, and Rick Singer, who is best known as the mastermind of the Varsity Blues admissions scandal. Check out College Matters wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the New Books Network.
I'm Chris Holmes, and this is Burned by Books. Here you'll find interviews with writers you already love, like Jennifer Egan and Rebecca Mackay, mixed in with up-and-coming voices like Alexandra Kleeman and Rumaan Alam. You'll find us wherever you listen to podcasts, but check out previous episodes at burnedbybooks.com and on Instagram and Twitter at burnedbybooks. Let's start the show. When we talk about literary fiction that turns the lens inward, that observes the quiet forces of love, devotion, loneliness, and obligation, few novels arrive with the force of Some Bright Nowhere, Ann Packer's most recent novel. Published in November 2025 and selected for Oprah's Book Club, it's a work that asks us to sit with questions we'd rather avoid, questions that we spend our life running from. At its heart is a long-married couple, Claire and Eliot, partners for nearly 40 years, whose life together has weathered ordinary joys and ordinary sorrows. But when Claire's long struggle with cancer reaches its final stage, the story shifts from what has been to what remains. Instead of seeking comfort in the familiar, the arms and care of her husband, Claire makes a startling request. She wants her closest friends, not Eliot, to tend her in her last weeks. It is a choice that fractures bonds and promises, deepens the emotional cost of her passing, and exposes the full complexity of love at the extremis of our fragile mortality. In a voice at once compassionate and unflinching, Ann Packer places us inside Eliot's interiority where we live with his confusion, grief, devotion, and slow reckoning with loss. But the novel never turns away from the uncomfortable truths at the margins of caregiving and intimacy. By relying on the quotidian details of what the poet Marie Howe famously called what the living do, rather than looking toward one single emotional epiphany, Some Bright Nowhere becomes a meditation on the textures of loyalty, love, partnership, grief, and all that comes afterwards. Ann Packer is the author of 5 previous works of fiction, including the best-selling novels The Children's Crusade and The Dive from Clawson's Pier, which received the Kate Chopin Literary Award, among many other prizes and honors. Her short fiction has appeared in The New Yorker and in the O. Henry Prize Stories anthologies, and her novels have been published around the world. A Bay Area native, she currently spends most of her time in New York and Maine. Welcome to Burned by Books, Ann Packer.
Thank you so much. And what a lovely summary of the novel.
I'm going to just say that while I'm not unfamiliar with narratives of profound loss, there was something about this conceit, a dying partner who no longer wishes to be cared for by her husband, that almost felt too painful for me to read. I am, however, enormously grateful that I continued on. But I wonder how you grappled with the subject matter as something that might in fact be too much for some readers.
Interesting question. I would have to say honestly that I didn't grapple with that at all.
That's a good answer, I think.
Yeah. I wanted to do it, and so I did it. It's well known to writers of literary fiction that readers don't love being taken to emotionally difficult places all the time. Unfortunately, that's what I'm drawn to write, and so I don't have much choice.
Yeah, The Dive from Clawson's Pier is not asks some profound and difficult questions as well. So it's clearly something you're familiar with in your work. And I struggled to, as I was writing this, to ask myself, well, why is this different in some way than, I've read extraordinary both memoirs and nonfiction books, but also fiction about end of life and end of life relationships. But there was something about this shutting of the door that I found rather unique. And frankly, that's what I look for in literature. And so I wonder how that came to you as the conceit for the novel, because I was struggling to think of another novel that had this, especially, I think, in the interesting way that you had it be the wife that chooses to close that door.
Mm-hmm. It's not based on, but inspired by, I guess I would say, a situation I heard about very much in passing long ago, maybe 20 years or so. And I didn't hear much. I heard, this woman was dying. Her husband was deemed inadequate to the task of caring for her. And so, two women friends moved in and did the job. And I don't know if they asked him to leave. That was purely my invention, my addition to the circumstance I'd heard about. But it intrigued me immediately. I thought, you get it, like women taking care of women. Yes, I get that. I understand the impulse for that kind of relationship to be the one that you spend your last time with. But I could never really get past the effect on the husband. And it's interesting, when I first thought about doing this, working with this material, I thought that I would use multiple points of view. And I actually started a draft that opened with the wife. It wasn't Claire, it was a different woman, and moved into the point of view of one of her friends. And I just ran out of steam after about 50 pages. I wasn't compelled by it. And it wasn't until I thought sometime later, wait, maybe the whole thing is his point of view, that I was able to really immerse myself and write very quickly and intensely.
It is. I absolutely wanted to talk to you about what I feel like is an audacious and really kind of brilliant choice to make Eliot the primary focus point. I think because then what you have is the reader experiencing being shut out, because it's a limited third person, so it can it can drift, but really hews to Eliot's experience and interiority for the most part. And that formally, I think, does something magical with the reader's experience of feeling like you're left out at the perhaps the most important time at which your presence might have meant something to someone else. So can you talk a little bit about how you imagined that feeling, both for Eliot, but also perhaps for the reader?
Yeah, once I moved past the idea of rotating among the four central characters, the two friends and the wife and the husband, and decided to stay with him, it seemed right to me, partly because I knew it had to be a very short novel, and I needed
did it need to be a short novel?
Hospice means they're 6 months or less. So you've got a ticking clock, basically. Now, not everyone dies within that period of time, but entering hospice means you're going to die soon. And for me, the element of time and losing time and having it run out is really central to Eliot's experience. And it felt right to me that he not sort of lose sight of that clock. And indeed, he on a number of different occasions is sort of filled with consternation because he doesn't know exactly how long it's going to be. Is it 3 to 6 months? Is it, 1 to 3 months? It had to be short. It's funny, when I was writing, I write very intuitively. I'm not at all analytical in a first draft. And I thought, well, this book is, I want it to be like a knife. And I didn't bother to sort of ask myself what I meant. I just thought it's just got to be like a knife. And what I came to understand later was that it needed to be short and pointed. And so the blade is not so much sharp as short and pointed. I guess it's a paring knife. So anyway, I could say now in retrospect, well, it's a novel that deals with people dealing with very intense pain. So who wants to spend more than a couple hundred pages with? But that wasn't what I was thinking at the time. I wasn't, as I say, I was just sort of moving very intuitively from, scene to scene. And it is a very scene-based, for an interior novel, it's a very scene-based novel as well. And that sort of led to the pointed part. I wanted there to be some propulsion.
Yeah, so knife, I think, is a very appropriate term, paring knife even. And that's a really, I think, important to know detail that you're thinking about like a kind of hospice timeline as you're thinking about the length of this work, because it feels day to day. It doesn't, like, we don't have big long stretches of loss where, as you say, scene to scene in the final days and weeks of life. And you say you've sort of sculpted it as scenes. There's some key scenes in here that have nothing to do with Claire's loss and Eliot's confrontation of that loss, but feels so important to how Eliot will come to understand what is going on. And one of them is his dinner group, his supper club with some gentlemen and in his life. And I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about how you shaped that scene, especially the first dinner scene.
Okay. Yeah. Well, again, with sort of protestations that I didn't really shape, but I just wrote it.
Yeah. No, I think that's important for people to hear, because I think that they perhaps imagine that there's grand, like, structural plans. And I think it's nice that there are also intuitions.
Yes, very much so. And as I've sometimes described it, it's really coming out of my fingers as I type. There's not a sort of pause between the thought and the language taking shape. It's all one thing. I mean, I can start a sentence and have no idea where it's going. And I just keep typing and I have a sentence. In terms of the dinner club, so I can tell you a little anecdote about how that came to be.
Please.
That early, about 40 pages into the first draft, I asked my husband, who's also a writer, to let me know to read it and tell me if he thought I was onto something. I'd been sort of flailing about for a few years and was not a happy writer. And I just needed some encouragement other than my own sort of sense of, I seem to be adding pages, so it must be okay. So my husband read the first 40 pages and said, yes, absolutely, keep going. And he said, but I do have one thought, which is that Eliot's going to need a male space to operate in some of the time. And it made so much sense to me. And I thought he was absolutely right. And at the same time, I thought, oh God, I'm going to have him go to the gym. And I didn't want to do that. So, without being planful in any way, I moved him out of the house and wrote sentences, and those sentences were about how he was going to be heading off to this dinner club, which grew out of a cooking class, a men's cooking class that he took, and met these guys, and now they meet monthly to cook and talk about recipes in a very analytical way. And in terms of that scene, that first scene, there are two gatherings of this dinner club in the course of the novel. And the first one, what I discovered as I wrote it was how important self-consciousness was going to be for him, how important it was going to be that he was not only living with the displacement, he was living with worries about other people knowing about it. And so that when I wrote that bit, I definitely planted seeds for thematic development through the novel of his sort of the interrelationship between his owned thoughts about what's happening and feelings, but also his projected thoughts and what he imagines other people are going to be doing with this news of his, ouster, basically.
Do you? I also found that this scene, as well as a scene with a former colleague that he leaves in such an
Uh-huh.
upset state.
I know the
It's an incredible scene in which he's essentially told that he is boring and regimented and kind of much less capable than he imagined. And I wonder if you think of him as a character as really not having much self-consideration and introspection until this moment, in which he has to deal with all of this.
I think he actually has a fair amount for, I was about to say for a man, and I'll just go ahead and say for a man.
No, say it. Yeah.
Consideration.
Yeah. No, you can I think you can blanket it.
Yeah. Because he's been married to a woman who has a lot of awareness of how people operate psychologically. But he also has blind spots.
Okay.
At the same time, one thing, there's a scene with his son, we should just, for listeners, that's similar to the scene with the former colleague in that he gets a kind of painful sense of how he's been or is being seen by others. But I was always mindful that, one, they're not telling him the only truth. They're telling him the thing that they're thinking in the moment. And the moment is defined by this blow he's just received. So the psyche he's taking with him places is one that's already experiencing a wound. And, one of the lovely things that humans sometimes do is when they sense a wound, want to add to it.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about that a lot, not so much in the first drafts, but later looking back on those scenes, I was thinking, this isn't about establishing some, definite sense of who he is as a human being, so much as establishing the way that different moments in our lives give rise to different kinds of interactions with other people.
That's fascinating. Yeah. So it's like both, a revelation, but it's a revelation at a moment in which that other person is going to have other motivations for sharing this thing.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. I think that's such an interesting way of coming at that. One of the most pressing and difficult questions you ask in Some Bright Nowhere is what obligations the dying have to a partner who will live on, as we presume Eliot will. We really only discuss publicly anyway, the question of the caregiver's obligations. And what was it like to switch that and to ask of Claire what are her obligations to Eliot?
It kept coming down for me. It kept coming down to the question of what to do with problematic feelings in a relationship. Because Claire, this idea of having her friends with her for her death is not something that Claire's been carrying around for years, saving up to the moment when it was, the right time to tell Eliot what she wanted.
It feels very spontaneous.
Yeah, it's whimsical, it's spontaneous, and she starts to tell him about it, and then she doesn't. And then she waits a day, and then she does tell him, and she's struggling. And I think I saw her as, yes, asking something very difficult of him, but also giving him the opportunity to know her true feelings in the moment and to not pretend that she hasn't had this idea. And in the end, it's not so much that she says, will you do this for me? She says, this is what I'm dreaming of. And now it's up to you what to do with that knowledge. And Eliot believes there's power in a dying wish and discovers himself to be somewhat unique in that view. But for him, it's part of being a responsive spouse. is to respond to that last wish. I mean, that sets up all kinds of chaos for him,
Mm-hmm.
but he does do it. I hear that you're asking sort of more broadly about whether or not someone at the end of their life should be truthful.
Yeah, and I wonder if writing this, gave you a different perspective than you might have had at the beginning.
I don't think, it's funny. I don't think I have a sense of, I don't come at it with a sense of right or wrong. I really come at it as a sense of what and how and why. So I see characters and people as, driven by powerful forces that can be understood or can be attempted to be understood, rather than making good or bad choices.
That's fascinating. So Claire, obviously, she dreams of and looks to her friends in her waning days to be company, to be caregivers, to be support. They're referred to at one point as the three witches. They exist for the most part, on the outside of our third-person limited narrative for most of the novel. And you clearly want to consider the importance of that kind of female friendship and companionship as something different from coupling up. But you also ask the question of what a partner deserves to know about that world of friendship and sometimes private friendships. And I wonder if there's some tension between those two things for you in this novel.
I think I'm always interested in the sort of disruptive power of curiosity in any relationship, and what curiosity does to both the curious person and the person about whom the curiosity is so pressingly present. So I think in the book, I wanted Eliot to be at a moment where something that he thought he really understood, or understood as well as he cared to or needed to, sort of shifted for him as the end of his wife's life was drawing near. And he discovers, sort of to his surprise, that they're now sort of a subject of, they're fascinating to him. And he wants to know more. He engages in some, sort of small acts of spycraft to try to what it is. Is it about them? Why them? Why not me? I feel like I've wandered away from your question, though, and I'm not sure I'm really answering it.
No, I mean, you're in, I think, a more interesting territory, that his insatiable knowledge or desire for knowledge about why. What is it about these women? And, I don't think it gives away too much to say that he doesn't really get a definitive answer. He just understands that there is something, and that something is important and carries weight for Claire at the end. Do you think that's the case, or do you feel like he comes around and knows in some definable way?
Well, and here the possibility of a spoiler is probably at its only real. The only possibility of a spoiler is right now, so I'm going to be very careful. But I will say that I think that both Claire and Eliot discover that there were things going on in this request that neither of them really understood at the time.
Yeah, I didn't want to spoil.
Yeah,
but I think that's a nice dangle for future readers.
Not too much.
No, I think that's perfect. American culture is so bad at dealing with death. We have built structures of unimaginable size and importance designed solely to get us to forget our mortality, or believe that it can be pushed off with a certain vitamin or cream or exercise regimen. We imagine bucket lists of extraordinary acts and experiences that will make death palatable. And this cultural amnesia is not what Claire wants. And it's certainly not what the novel imagines is a a profound way to experience loss, grief, and ultimately death. How did you come to think about an American death in this case that might stand outside of that? And where did you come down once you had finished the novel and thinking about that question of how we deal with death, particularly in our culture?
So I guess what I would say is that once you're this close, there's sort of no real possibility of denial. They are within months or possibly weeks. And the body, Claire's body, can't go to Japan or climb a mountain or do any of these sort of crazy bucket list things that you hear about. They're very much past whatever denials they went through. And I didn't want to dwell in the past or try to explain what had come before, what their relationship was like. But we're in the final minutes here, and there's nothing to do but face it head on. There's sort of no way to get around it.
There's that knife again.
Yeah. And I am always very interested in stories that get very, very close to the bone of intense feeling. And this, I don't think I really came away feeling anything other than that I had found material that really compelled me, and that I had created characters who seemed to me to provide a good scaffolding. Let's really mangle the metaphor for the knife to skate along. I guess what I'm trying to say is I didn't think about the American denial of death.
I don't want to spoil things, but one of the things I find deeply compelling about reading this novel, and I just want to flag that, the first 4 of your blurbs on the back of this novel are 4 of the novelists that I have found myself most engrossed by and most impressed with, and I love that they love this novel too. And one of the things that I found so deeply compelling is that the novel does not ask me to come around to Claire's side of things. Even understanding that there are some circumstances that we don't know to the very end, the novel is fine with me feeling like maybe I hate Claire's choice. Maybe I hate Eliot having to go through this process, even if the process is illuminating for him. But the fact that you allow for a reader to live in this world and find that there is pleasure in getting to imagine something you find unimaginable, I think is perhaps the greatest strength of the novel. And I wondered if, I know you're an intuitive writer, but what is your relationship to thinking about Claire's side of things and whether it matters that a reader come around in some way?
So I'm always striving to find what feels real to me. I don't care at all if readers like or dislike or admire or revile my characters. So I'm never concerned about bringing them around. I'm concerned more about the characters than I am a reader, in the sense that I want, in particular, a point of view character, a main character, to start in one place and end up in another one, and for the reader to fully believe the transformation. I sometimes joke that I write books about people changing their minds. But I actually think that's pretty much true. There's not a lot of, they're very interior, as you said in your intro. So I feel I look at my job, and not that it's a job, but I look at what I'm doing as spending time alone creating a thing that works according to that satisfies my sense of what it should be, which is sort of tautological, but okay. And then it goes out, and people have experiences of it, and it's sort of I mean, it doesn't really belong to me anymore. I'm always very interested to hear what people think and very honored to think that they're thinking about it at all. But I'm not trying to give them a certain experience.
Mm-hmm.
Although I do like to make people cry.
Well, you were successful with me, and I guarantee with others. Before I sort of ask you about some of the books you've been reading and loving recently, I realized I didn't even reference these blurbists on the back who are so important to me. But Ruth Thorpe, Andrew Sean Greer, Asgul Savas, and Tanya James, I think are four extraordinary novelists, and
Yes.
they think a lot about this book very clearly. Was it wonderful to get those blurbs?
Oh gosh, yes, it's absolutely wonderful. The blurb business it's a lot of pressure, but it really makes a difference. I think it makes most of the difference really inside the publishing house. I think that it really, really helps get the sales reps very interested in a book. And then, of course, it makes a difference on a table. But I don't know, how often do you buy or not buy a book based on a blurb versus just sort of a sense of what it's about, or the author, or I don't know, the cover?
I think so. First and foremost, I'm interested in what this book is going to ask of me in the process. But I will say that I've come to know certain authors as very honest in their appreciations in blurbs, and others as just sort of, scattershot. And so certain authors, when I see a blurb by them, that can override whether or not I'm interested or not in a book. So they are important to me. But I also know that it's a publisher's game as much as anything else.
Yeah, but it's part of how we do this business. We who are involved in it in any way, and it's a great honor to have a writer you admire come back and admire your book. There's really nothing like it.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Well, before I let you go, and I would love to hear a little bit about maybe some books that you've been reading and loving recently.
Sure. So, a novel that I had barely heard of when I picked it up, but that people then began to talk about a lot. So it developed some force sometime after it was published, I believe. I'm not sure about this. Anyway, enough preamble. It's a novel called Loved and Missed. And
oh my gosh!
Right?
This was mentioned by two other guests, and so I went out and read it, and it's so incredible.
Oh, how funny! Yes, it's an amazing, amazing book. And I've bought 3 or 4. This is Susie Boyd. I bought, I don't know, 2 or 3 others of her books, and I'm now blanking on the title of the one I've read, but I loved it also.
Oh, I'll have to
check
look
it out.
for
It's
other
not
stuff.
Love and Fame. It might be called The Little Hours. Anyway, you'll figure it out. It's very, very good. Very, very, very good. And I read a novel, and this is actually, it's funny. This novel relates very closely to my book. I read it after I'd written my book, and it's called The Spare Room by the Australian writer Helen Garner.
Oh, she's amazing, but I haven't read Spare Room.
Oh, well, it's about a woman who has a friend who's dying and brings her to stay with her. And it's terrific, and it has more edge and toughness than the description might make you imagine, in a good way.
I think everyone should be reading Helen Garner.
Yeah, she's fantastic. And then, I read a memoir. This is maybe a year or 2 ago, called Everything, Nothing, Someone. Is that right? Everything. Alice Carriere. Everything, Nothing, Someone, I think is the title. And it's a memoir about growing up the daughter of the artist Jennifer Bartlett.
Oh,
and it is a stunner of a book. It's such a powerful accounting of a really, really difficult childhood and youth.
Well, I need a good memoir, because someone recently depressingly told me that the memoir as something that publishers are interested in is dying after a long period of of great interest. And
Very
so,
alive. Yeah.
yeah, so I'm hoping that this will make me think that that's not true.
Yeah, that's so interesting because it feels right now like a very full bookshelf.
Yeah, so vibrant and interesting and developing, but well, maybe they were just they were just wrong. Let's hope.
Or just like looking way out across the ocean and seeing something, some little something on the horizon that's headed our way.
Yeah. Well, these are three amazing books, but I just really want to recommend Some Bright Nowhere by Ann Packer. It is a book that I found daunting at first, and then I just simply adored living with Eliot in this moment of extremes of feeling and wondering about obligations to loved ones and how one understands oneself outside of those things. And as with those wonderful novelists, I know that my readers will find much to love in Some Bright Nowhere. And thank you so much for coming on the show, Anne.
Thank you so much, Chris. It was a pleasure.
Well, that's all for me for now. My thanks to Ann Packer for coming on to talk about her latest novel, Some Bright Nowhere. You can find links to purchase Some Bright Nowhere and all of Anne's recommended books at the website, burnedbybooks.com. There you'll find all of our previous episodes, links to buy a podcast t-shirt, and ways to get in contact. As you listen, take a moment to rate the show on iTunes, Spotify, and now YouTube, or wherever you find your podcasts. Until next time, this has been Burned by Books.